Good evening. Father Alexander here, and welcome to our next step along the journey in our walking tour through the Bible. And we're in the book of Leviticus, traditionally the most boring book of the Bible from our Christian perspective. And but the book I hope I've shown is rather quite interesting. Chapter 11 is about clean and unclean animals. Now, we all know that our Jewish brethren do not eat certain foods, and certain animals are regarded as unclean and certain animals are regarded as clean. Or in modern parlance, certain animals are kosher and other animals are trayf. Kosher can be eaten, trayf can never be eaten. Well, the chapter 11 of Leviticus sort of sets out a table of what is clean and what is unclean. And so we're told, for example, all that lives in water, you may eat anything that has fins and scales. So clearly you wouldn't be able to eat a crocodile, but you would be able to eat, an ordinary sort of fish. You wouldn't be able to eat a sea urchin, but you would be able to eat, for example, a salmon, and so on. Now, why is this? You can't eat, of course, shrimps, and you can't eat lobster. Whether it's got scales and whether it's got fins is neither here nor there. These are just markers of what is edible, what's not edible. And again, of all the animals living on land, you may eat any animal that has a cloven hoof divided into two parts, and that is ruminant. So you can't eat rabbits and you can't eat hares, because even though they're ruminant, they don't have cloven hoofs, they have paws. It's all very curious. It's not telling us why some animals are unclean and some are clean. It's just giving us the categorizations, which are and which aren't, and how you can tell. So has this got a cloven hoof? Then we can eat it. So you can't eat a camel, which doesn't have a cloven hoof, but you can eat some. You can, but you can't eat a pig either, because that's you will regard the pig as unclean because though it has a cloven hoof, divided into two parts, it is not a ruminant. Yeah. So therefore the pigs are out. And then of course it talks about insects. Apparently you can eat locusts of all varieties, but that's about all the insects you can eat. Now all this is very, very curious because it's pretty obvious that, for example, the thing about fish wouldn't apply to people living in the desert because there's no sea in the desert, there are no lakes, there are no rivers. Locusts, however, would apply to people living in the desert, so because locusts would be a standard food in the desert. People would eat locusts, and we know that John the Baptist went into the desert to eat locusts. The usual explanation of this law of what you can eat and what you can't eat is that because people lived in the desert and they had no refrigeration, therefore it was unwise for them to eat certain types of food, and this was a health law. The other thing that I think really does underline it is you're not allowed to eat scavengers. So you can't eat dogs, you can't eat pigs, and you can't eat lobsters, things that eat dead animals, essentially. Whereas you can eat vegetarian animals, such as cows, and of course animals that kill their prey. You can eat those, I think. Not sure. It's all a bit complicated. And of course, taking these rules about what's what, ruminants and cloven hoofs and things like that, modern Jews are able to work out what can be eaten and what can't be eaten of the animals that are not mentioned in the Bible, such as crocodiles, such as ostriches, and things like that, such as not camels, but the giraffes. Can you eat a giraffe? I don't think you can, actually, because it doesn't have a cloven hoof. It's because it's part of the camel family as well. But why is God giving his chosen people these rules? It is mysterious to us. We don't understand it. I mean, nowadays, I think modern Jewish people say, well, we're no longer in the desert. We do have refrigeration. All foods are safe to eat, but we keep to these laws as a sign of our Jewish identity. So that seems to admit, I've heard people say this, that seems to admit that the laws about eating are completely arbitrary. Now, as Christians, we don't believe in arbitrary laws. We do not believe in divine command theory. We don't ever say you mustn't eat that because God has said you mustn't eat it. We would say don't eat that because it's bad for you, or don't eat that because it's poisonous, or don't eat that because it's environmentally damaging, or don't eat that because it's been cruelly raised, things like foie gras. But we don't actually say, this is forbidden because God has said so. And indeed, right at the beginning of the Bible, God proclaimed, he looked on his work of creation, he saw all that he had made, and he found it to be good. So if God has created things that are good, why shouldn't we be able to eat them? Why shouldn't we be able to enjoy them? It's very curious. It's very curious indeed. It's even more curious for us because Jesus actually abolished all the laws to do with eating and drinking. This comes in the Acts of the Apostles. It's not in the. So it's not when Jesus was alive. The risen Christ did it. He tells St. Peter, kill and eat. And St. Peter says, a bit sort of snootily, I have nothing unclean has ever passed my lips. Well, that's not surprising because St. Peter spent his entire life in the Jewish nation. And in the Jewish nation, there were no pigs. There, of course, when they went to the lands of the Gadarenes, they found some pigs there. But generally speaking, you didn't have unclean food in Israel at that time because there was no demand for it. Just as now, if you go to a Muslim country such as Turkey, which is wears its Islam quite lightly, you just don't find bacon. You don't find pork sausages because the people don't eat them. And so when you get back to England, you find that you're dying for a bacon sandwich, even if you haven't had one for years. Because it's very strange if you begin to notice how restricted the diet is. We eat everything. We are omnivores. And we see in eating and drinking, we don't really see what you eat and what you drink as being really very impinging on our moral lives. And right at the end of this chapter, towards the end of this chapter 11, it says, I, the Lord, who am your God, you have been sanctified and have become holy because I am holy. Do not defile yourselves with all these creatures that swarm on the ground. Yes, it is I, the Lord, who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. You must therefore be holy because I am holy. In other words, the restrictions on eating are to do with the people's consecration to the Lord, and therefore there are daily reference to the fact that they belong to God. Although there's no intrinsic reason why you shouldn't eat pork. Rather, there's an extrinsic reason. Don't eat pork because you belong to God and because God has called you to himself. He has made you his people. He has made you holy. And as a sign of your holiness, although it's completely extrinsic and arbitrary, we do not eat pork. So there it is. It's curious. It does raise questions for Christian morality. And Christian morality is never extrinsic, it's always intrinsic. And remember, we don't believe in divine command theory. We simply do not believe that we must avoid something simply because God has said so. We avoid certain things because they're wrong in themselves. Hope I've explained that. It's a curious one, isn't it? You could really spend your entire life contemplating these strange rules that God has given us in the book of Leviticus, and indeed there are some people who do exactly that, namely our rabbinic brethren who devote themselves to the study of the Torah day in, day out, looking at the law of God once given on Mount Sinai. And let's remember, he gave a law that shall not pass away, words that shall endure from age to age. Blessed be the name of the Lord. All the best. Bye.